How I make an extra large double layer beanie hat. My husband has a 24-inch head circumference versus me, I have a 21.5-inch head circumference. So the main thing I have found to make a hat that works best for him is the type of yarn. It doesn't need to be wool, you can use acrylic as well, but the main difference is finding one that says DK. This stands for double knit, and this is usually a number 3 weighted yarn. I find that number 4 weighted yarn or worsted yarns are too thick, and it doesn't seem to want to give enough stretch for his larger head circumference. Next is because this is a thinner yarn, you do need to add more rows as well so we can get the length that we want. Usually for me, if I'm using a number 4 worsted weight yarn, I do 120 rows. Again, I have a 21.5-inch head circumference. If your head is slightly larger, you might want to do maybe 125, 130 rows. When I'm using DK or number 3 weighted yarn, for me, I do 130 rows. But for my husband, he has a 24-inch head circumference. I need to do 145 rows, and this gives him also a little bit of brim that he can fold up as well. So I had 3 skeins of yarn. Each skein was 50 grams, and it was 123 yards each. I was able to make 2 beanie hats, one that I would call a standard size, adult size that fits me, and then an extra large size that fits him. And I had a little bit of yarn left over. So I do a center pull for the yarn bowl, and then we're going to cast on like normal onto our machine. I like to start at my white needle. If you would like a full step-by-step tutorial, I do have it pinned to the top of my page on how to make a beanie hat. That goes a little bit slower with the steps for making the double layer. So first I'm going to cast on, and that does not count towards my row count. Once I do the cast on and I start cranking out my rows like normal, for an extra large beanie hat, I'm going to do 145 rows. So this takes about 1.5 skeins of yarn that I had. For tension, I do have this yarn in the smallest hole of the tension bar, but I don't really rely on the tension bar to keep tension. I use it more as a guide for the yarn to feed it up and through the yarn holder. I like to use my left hand to give the yarn the tension because I find it helps it to create more even stitches as we go through the yarn skein and we get less and less yarn, so we would get less and less tension. And I also find I don't drop as many stitches doing it this way. So once I have my 145 rows cranked out, we're going to cast off with a needle, and I start at my white needle and go all the way around, and I pick up each stitch all the way around, and I like to pick them up on the right side of my machine. Again, I don't seem to drop as many stitches. Next, we're going to make our beanie hat just like we normally would. We have our 2 ends of our tubes that we're going to cinch down together. But before we do that, since I had to add on a second skein of yarn to crank out all the rows, you just want to make sure the 2 tail ends of the yarn are knotted down together so they don't unravel. If you would like a step-by-step tutorial on how to add on a second yarn skein, if you want to change color or anything like that, I will also have that linked in the video description below, along with a slower step-by-step tutorial on how to completely crank out your first beanie hat if you have never done one. But we're making the beanie hat just like normal for a double layer. We put both ends of the tubes on the same side, essentially folding it in half, making the double layer beanie hat, and then we cinch down to close both ends of the tube. The way we cast it on and cast it off of the machine makes like a drawstring effect, and as you pull the tail into the working yarn, it will cinch it down closed. You might just need to kind of tuck in the stitches. They tend to want to curl, so you just kind of got to fiddle with them a little bit to get them all lined up, and then we are just going to secure the tail end of our yarn, and then we knot it together. I also like sewing back and forth a few times where we cinched closed the tops of our tubes. Sewing back and forth a few times with the tail end of your yarn keeps this from that top part of your beanie hat from coming open, because the yarn can stretch over time with wear and washing and drying it. If it's acrylic yarn, you can usually dry it. Wool yarn, you do want to lay flat to dry it. Always check the instructions on your yarn skein that comes on the label on how to wash and dry your fabric. So here is how the extra large beanie hat looks on my husband. Here is a front view, and he does have a little bit of a brim and then a profile view. And as you can see, the thinner yarn does give a little bit more stretch, so it fully fits around his head circumference. It's really nice to do the double layer as well. so it's still nice and warm for him. So I hope this helps on how to make an extra large beanie hat. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate all the comments, all the likes, and all your support of my videos. Happy crafting, everybody.